Hi, I'm Lou, and in today's video I'm going to help you identify 10 of the UK's common woodland plants. So join me for a walk this fine spring afternoon. I'm going to see what we can find. I'm going to cover some of the identifiable traits so that hopefully you'll be able to recognise them back in your own woodlands. There also might be some that are edible. Now, if there are some that are edible, remember if you're going to be foraging at home, make sure you really know how to correctly identify things. And I would signpost you to my video up here that talks about foraging and keeping safe if you are doing those sorts of foraging activities, either yourself or with your forest school groups. Some species might be easily confused with others, so I'll do my best to try and point out those differences too. There are also potentially some uses that the plants may have that we'll also maybe talk about. If you're interested in a particular plant, I've put a list of the plants we'll be looking at down below in the description, along with what time in the video we start talking about them. So this is Primrose. It's one of the first spring flowering plants. In fact, the name Primrose comes from Prima rosa, which means first flower. So it grows in a rosette of leaves that all meet in a certain point. The leaves are very crinkled. They're long in shape with a blunt end. In terms of size, they can be very small, or they can grow quite large, so they can be different in size. And this plant, all of the aerial parts are edible, so the leaves and the flowers. In fact, the flowers have been used traditionally to make wine, and also they've been crystallized with sugar to make cake decorations. You can eat it raw or you can cook them. I tend to prefer the younger tips. They are a bit of an acquired taste raw, but I've noticed if you dip them in batter, fry them up and serve them with a bit of maple syrup, then that improves the taste quite a lot. So this is Foxglove, that's Digitalis purpurea, and I've picked this example to show you particularly because it's still very small for a foxglove. It's only started growing. Now, foxglove is a biennial plant, which means in its first year it just stays like this rosette without sending its flower up, but then in its second year it sends up that characteristic big long tall flower spike with those purple bell-shaped flowers that I'm sure we've all seen, and the bees love going in them. So features to think about here are the leaves are quite crinkly, they're long, they're a bit pointed at the ends. They're also incredibly soft and downy. One of the important issues to think about is when foxglove is young like this and just got its rosette, it can be easily confused with primrose. Now, foxglove is poisonous and primrose is edible, so of course you'd want to make sure you were getting that right if you were foraging. Now, the main differences between the primrose and the foxglove leaves are foxglove has more pointed tips at the end of the leaf as opposed to primrose that is more rounded. They're both quite crinkly. Foxglove tends to be softer, more hairy, and then one of the key features is actually the vein patterns on the back of the leaves. With foxglove, the veins run more linear up towards the top of the leaf, in more parallel, whereas primrose tends to spread out at right angles and go straight to the edges of the leaf. So that's another key ID point. The chemicals in foxglove that make it poisonous are cardiac glycozoids. Now, these have the effect of slowing down and strengthening the heartbeat, which, of course, if that slows down too much, we're not going to be too happy. So this little plant down here is Lesser Celandine, and that tends to come out quite early in the springtime too. It's a member of the buttercup family, and it has these arrow-shaped glossy green leaves, quite a dark green in colour, and a longish leaf stem. Its flowers are bright yellow. They look like little sunshines shining out, and they do tend to track the sun. So the ones down here that I'm looking at the moment are actually all shut up now because the sun is going down. Because it's part of the buttercup family, majority of species in that family are poisonous. So all the green parts above ground are poisonous on this plant. However, it does have an edible starchy root which you need to cook. So I've just dug one up here so that I can show you the edible roots. I wouldn't normally uproot a plant, but this is a patch where it is very abundant, and I'm going to put it back in the hole afterwards. But if you can see these little nodules, these are the starchy parts that you can cook up and eat. So in the past, people believed that God left us clues in the appearance of things to give us an idea of what they could be used for medicinally. This comes from the doctrine of signatures, and so this one's known as Pilewort. I'll let your own imagination kind of think about why that might be and what it might have been used for in the past medicinally. So I'm going to put this little plant back, and hopefully it will continue growing without my disturbance. There we go. Thank you, little plant. So this is Lords and Ladies, or Cuckoo Pint. Its scientific name is Arum maculatum, so it's a member of the lily family. It grows these large arrow-shaped leaves. So the leaves can be plain green or they can be spotted. In fact, that's what the species name maculatum means, spotted. The leaves are very green and smooth, and they've got long leaf stems down to the base. Later in the year, it will send up a big flower stem with a big hooded shaped flower called the spathe, and then an erect phallus and an erect phallic looking structure called a spadix, which apparently is one of the reasons it's called Lords and Ladies. This one, I notice its flower stalk has already been nibbled off by something. I've heard another story as to how it got its name Lords and Ladies, and that's to do with its root. It has a big starchy taproot that was used in laundry starch. So in Elizabethan days, it was perhaps what they got their washerwomen to starch their big ruffs with. It has a fascinating biology though in how it gets pollinated, because the lower parts of the hood actually traps pollinating insects inside and forces them to transfer pollen. It doesn't eat the insects like sundews or other carnivorous plants. It just traps them for a little while and then eventually releases them. Lords and Ladies contains oxalate crystals, which causes irritations to membranes. Therefore, it's one that you don't want to be eating. It's a toxic species. And actually, if you were to put any amount in your mouth, you'd very quickly spit it out, because those oxalate crystals start piercing the soft membranes of the mouth and it burns and burns. So this is wild garlic, or Ramsons, and it's a wild cousin of our domestic onion family. It tends to form dense carpets across the woodland, and this is one that you can smell before you can see it sometimes, as it really smells of garlic. The leaves are broad, longer than they are wide, glossy and smooth. They have smooth leaf margins as well. They grow not in rosettes, but in single stemmed leaves that come up out the ground. The leaves have a central dominant main vein that almost causes it to have a convex appearance, like it's rolling in on itself. In the springtime, they send up a flower stalk with a collection of white starlight flowers. It's a good edible, all parts of it are edible. Ramsons has quite a potent garlicky flavour. You can eat it raw, however some people find it a little bit too strong for their palate. If that's the case, I suggest cooking it up in a soup or an omelette to add some flavour to your cooking. Keeps the vampires away anyway. My personal favourite recipe with Ramsons is to get a piece of cheese, wrap it in Ramsons and then melt it on the fire. Tasty. If you are foraging, something to be careful of is because it grows in dense carpets, sometimes other species can be mixed in amongst it, and particularly toxic species. So really make sure that you're not grabbing just handfuls of plants, but picking individual specimens. The two main species that you might confuse it with is Lily of the Valley and Lords and Ladies, both of which are poisonous species. So you really want to make sure you know the difference. Lily of the Valley has got similar shaped leaves, however they come out in pairs on one leaf stalk, whereas Ramsons will always only have one leaf per stalk. If they're in flower, then that's much more reliable because they have very different shaped flowers. Ramsons has small star-like flowers, whereas Lily of the Valley has very lily bell-shaped type flowers. Lords and Ladies has quite a different shaped leaf when it's fully grown. It's kind of an arrow shape. However, the confusion can come when the leaves are small and perhaps not yet fully grown. So this is actually a young leaf of Lords and Ladies that I found. So you can see that it has got some resemblance to a Ramsons leaf. As the leaves grow and get older, you can see that it has that more distinctive arrow-shaped leaf and wouldn't be confused. So a lot of woodland plants will flower early in the year in spring, and they do this because it's before most of the broadleaf trees have got their leaves fully out, and so they're making the most of the light reaching the forest floor, because once the leaves come out they'll be too shaded, so there's pressure on them to get their flowers out quickly and early. So you really want to try and get out into the woods in April, May time if you can, to see these beautiful flowers carpeting the woodland. So this here is the red dead nettle. Even though it's called nettle, it's not actually related to stinging nettle very closely. It's actually a member of the mint family. And we know it's a member of the mint family because of certain ID traits. So one of those is it's got a square stem. So if I was to cut that stem off and look down it in profile, I would see it's square in shape, and I can feel that by rolling that in my fingers. It also has an opposite, alternate or decussant leaf structure, meaning that two leaves come off in opposite pairs one way, and then the next pair of leaves above it will come off at 90 degrees to that one. So if you look down on a plant that's in the mint family, it's almost like a cross in shape. Also, often plants in the mint family are quite fragrant, pungent. If you think of things like mint, they're quite aromatic, they've got quite a strong smell often. The flowers in the mint family are usually this sort of mouth-like structure with two petals that are fused together to make a tube at the back of it. As I understand it, The Latin of the genus part of the name, Lamium, comes from lamia, which means gaping mouth, and other dead nettles are part of that genus too, like white dead nettle and also yellow archangel. With the dead red nettle, the leaves are finely hairy. They're also bluntly toothed around the margins. It tends to be quite a low growing short plant compared to, for example, white dead nettle, and the colour of the leaves are green, but the tops tend to go a purplish colour. You can also see they've got purpley red flowers. This is one of the edible plants, so the young tops can be eaten either raw in salads or they can be cooked as a vegetable too. It's not an unpleasant taste, it just tastes of furry green. So this little creeping plant is called ground ivy or Aleshoof, and it's another member of the mint family. So it has a square stem, it has the opposite alternate pattern of leaves. It is also very aromatic, and it has those tubular mouth-like flowers. You can see that it's called ground ivy because of its creeping growth pattern, and when it hits something vertical there, now it's growing upright, but it doesn't cling or root to the tree trunk like conventional ivy. So the leaf is quite rounded in shape, and it kind of divides a little bit where the stem, the leaf stem or the petiole joins it. It also has smoothly rounded lobed edges, and I guess it kind of looks like a hoof print, which is where the hoof part of the name of Aleshoof comes from. The other part, ale, I bet you can guess, it used to be used to flavour ale and clarify ale. It also is a very aromatic plant. I quite like the smell of it, but I know some people don't. It is actually edible, but because it's so aromatic, you probably wouldn't want to eat loads of it, but you can use it to make a refreshing tea, which I really like the flavour of, but I'll let you try it and see what you think. So I'm sure this is one that we would all recognise, the Bluebell. At this time of year, late April, May, it tends to carpet the woodland with this beautiful blue-purple colour. Some ID points for Bluebell: they have long strap-like leaves with a blunted point at the end. The leaves are glossy, not hairy in any way. The flowers are that characteristic bell-shaped flower hanging down one side of the stem. They also have quite a delicate fragrance that you can smell if you get up close. Lovely. Bluebells are one of the ancient woodland indicator species. These are plants that will only grow in land where there's been woodland for hundreds of years, and that means you can age your wood. If you've got a number of these species, it would suggest that your wood's been there for a very long time. Bluebells are protected by the Countryside and Wildlife Act, and so not a species that we want to pick. Although they are very pretty, they're best left here for the wildlife. They're also very sensitive to trampling, so you don't really want to be walking out into the sea of bluebells at this time of year. I've tried to be very careful and walk along deer paths to get to the ones that I'm filming now. Bluebells are a poisonous species, so not one you want to be munching on. Whilst it's in flower, it's unlikely to be confused with anything else, but when it's just the leaves, do be careful to check the leaf shape. it could be mistaken for Ramsons at a push, but the leaves are much thinner and strap-like compared to Ramsons, and it doesn't smell of garlic either. One of the threats to our native bluebell is a Spanish invader. The Spanish bluebells was introduced and wouldn't naturally grow in this country. However, it could outcompete our native English bluebell and also potentially can hybridise, meaning it would dilute the genetic pool of our native bluebells. To tell the difference between the two species, English bluebells, the native variety, has white anthers when you look inside the flower heads, creamy white. Spanish bluebell has blue ones. Spanish bluebell flowers are also a bit bigger and paler in colour. Also the leaves are a little bit broader than our native bluebell. The flowers of our native bluebell tend to all droop to one side, whereas the Spanish ones are all over the place. I have heard stories of uses for the sap from the bluebell. So the sap is very, very sticky, and in the past has been used to stick the fletchings onto arrows and also to bind books, apparently. There is also a lot of mythology and folklore associated with the bluebells, particularly related to fairies. Apparently, I've heard if you pick a bluebell, then you'll be lost, wandering forevermore through the woods because the fairies will lead you astray. So this is Dog's Mercury, and it's a species that tends to form carpets across the woodland floor. If we look at the leaf shape, they're longer than they are wide, lanceolate in shape, pointed at the ends with slightly toothed leaf margins. The leaves come off in opposite pairs and then turn 90 degrees at right angles to form that opposite alternate or decussate pattern. Dog's Mercury is in the spurge family and is in fact toxic, so not one that we want to be eating. So it contains methylamine and trimethylamine, which are the toxic chemicals within it, and apparently they would cause which can cause hemorrhaging and irritation to the gastrointestinal tract, which doesn't sound pleasant at all, which sounds like it makes your guts bleed. An interesting biological fact about the plant is that it's dioecious. That means it has its male and female reproductive parts on different individual plants. It is said that you can make a number of dyes out of different parts of the plant, the leaves, the stem and the roots. And apparently the colours that you might get are reds and blues. I confess I have had a little play with natural dyes, and I'm afraid all I got was yellow and beige, so I need to obviously practice my dyeing skills. So this is hedge garlic. It's also called garlic mustard, Jack in the hedge. It's got lots of common names, and the first thing I noticed being this close is its smell. It's got quite a pungent, garlicky, mustardy smell. Hedge garlic is a biennial plant, so in its first year, it's just a rosette of leaves. Its leaves, as you can see, are kind of triangular, heart-shaped with uneven teeth around the edge. They're very glossy, not hairy at all, and quite a bright green in colour. Then in its second year, it sends up its flower stalk, and it has these very pretty, very small white four-petalled flowers that kind of are like little white crosses gathered at the top of the plant. It is an edible plant, and it provides a garlicky, fresh taste to salads, or it could be cooked as well in stews or put in omelettes. Quite a pungent flavour. Its seed pods in the autumn time also provide seeds that are quite peppery or mustardy in flavour. They're very, very pokey, probably an acquired taste. Thanks for watching. Remember, plants are amazing and awesome things, so get to know them. They can be useful for all sorts of things and will add an extra dimension to your forest school practice. Bye. Thanks for watching. I hope it's been useful. A video about plants, and I've tried to be truthful. Do remember, whenever you have the need, you can seek comfort always by heading to the trees.